Welcome to LBBs Open House, a podcast on how to build brands better. I am Suchita, the co-founder of LBB, and I'm your host. On Open House, I have candid conversations with founders, CXOs, and investors behind India's most compelling brands. Today, I am in conversation with Varun Duggirala, who's the co-founder of an agency called The Glitch, which has the biggest clients coming out of India like Unilever, Nike, Nokia, Netflix, and many more. And today is a part of the WPP group. Varun is also the host of a podcast called Advertising is Dead, which is awesome, and I'm not calling it awesome just because I was on it. Each week he discusses the changes and developments in the world of marketing and advertising. You can find the link to it in our show notes and you should definitely check it out. Varun has had an absolutely fascinating career. He started out as an engineer and then he became a PR and marketing student, and he worked with MTV and Channel V for a bit before launching his own agency called The Glitch. We talk about the gradual morphing of advertising into becoming part art and part science. I was also curious about his point of view on podcasting and where audio as a medium is headed, and we talk about that as well as his experience in building his own personal brand. There is a lot of tactical and practical advice in this episode, and I hope you enjoy it. So, Welcome to Open House. Varun, are you all set?
I'm all set. This is fun.
I know. This is like you returning the favor. So thank you for being guest number 2 on season 2 of Open House. I learned a lot from you, by the way, and I'm going to get into your podcasting journey and how you frame your questions, and you're just able to extract so much information out of your guests. But I think if we could just circle back and start with, if you could give like a TLDR version of how did you get into advertising? Because you've obviously had a super interesting engineer, goes to PR, goes to, everything else. So if you could just give a quick snapshot of how did you get here?
Okay. Born, brought up in a small town called Kakinada, which is now called a city. Coast of Andhra Pradesh. Was there till my 10th standard. Grew up on a good dose of Chiranjeevi and Michael Jackson. Moved to Bangalore to my high school and eventually did my engineering, which is what all good South Indian boys do. Become an engineer, become a doctor. Half my family doctors, half my family engineers. And sucked at it, at engineering, that is. Then ended up freelancing, can't call it freelancing. Ended up just like moonlighting as a promoter for Jack Daniel's whiskey towards the end of my engineering. Did that for 3 hours a day, 7 days a week. Loved that job. And then worked as a promoter for Smirnoff, selling something called their party card. Worked for AOL cancellations for about 3 to 5 months. I don't remember how long it was because I did the graveyard shift, 2 a.m. to 9 a.m. And post that, ended up studying mass comm in Pune at Symbiosis. That's also where I met my co-founder, Rohit. And applied to MTV to intern, got into MTV to interned there for 4 months, went home thrice. I slept in that office. I had a sleeping bag and and a set of clothes I would take every 15, 20 days. And so did that, moved to Channel V from there. And when Channel V said they're going to stop playing music, it's the day me and Rohit decided that, okay, we want to do something together. And that's how Glitch happened. And that's 10 years for fast forward from our apartment to 350 odd people, 2 offices, got acquired 3 years ago. And 2 years ago, podcast happened. I get a short abridged version of
That's a great abridged version. No, but you've had a chance to see the length and breadth of advertising, right? Where I'm assuming back when you guys would have started The Glitch, digital was just about picking up and taking off, right? So let me ask you what I hope is the most vague question of today, which is what is the past, present, and future of advertising and marketing in your opinion?
I come from a very non-advertising lens, right? Because I never worked in advertising, didn't really study it because I studied production. We became advertisers by virtue of what we were doing. We built a company initially to kind of do digital content for brands. And as we kept creating content for brands, they kept saying, do you want to add strategy to it? Do you want to add tech to it? Can you do an agency's job? And we just became an agency. So my understanding of advertising has actually grown over the last few years, to be honest. I think the last 2 years of doing the podcast taught me a lot more about advertising than 10 years at Glitch. So if I had to go past, present, and future, I think the past was this slightly more streamlined process of having very set guardians of brands who would turn around and say, this is what the brand stands for. This is the only thing it will say. And this is how we're going to say it. What we're at right now is it's not the inflection point. Inflection points happened a couple of years ago where the mediums through which we reach consumers, which connect with them, kind of build that whole circle of what I call the Tinder for brands and consumers, is something that's really come to a point where it's a lot more dynamic now, right? The number of platforms, number of opportunities to interact with them, to also be able to complete the entire cycle. That advertising could never really get the sale. You would always push them towards, but you couldn't really complete that circle, and now you can. And that's really why it's an interesting time right now. So the present is that we're still figuring it out. I don't think we're even close to figuring out all the things that can be called advertising right now, because creativity is a strong part of it. Technology is a huge part of it. You can add commerce, content, like 50 other things I can name there. But what I feel the future will hold is we're going to see we're going to have a lot more structure come in again. We're right now lacking a lot of structure because of the number of things that have been thrown at us in the last 5 years. And the future is going to be a lot more structured, but I feel it's going to be built on top of a certain number of platforms. That you're going to have a platform of technology, you're going to have a platform of data. Creativity is going to be very focused. You're not going to have creativity for creativity's sake. You're either going to be very strongly pushing certain value or pushing some value to the consumer. So you're going to have very clear metrics, and we'll be a lot more scientific with it. Is the way I see the future of advertising, because that's really what is asked of us today, to actually be creative scientists, but not necessarily just creative or just scientists. So that's what I think the future is.
So, and if you're to get into the future, right, because striking a balance in between being creative and then being able to put a metric around it, right, especially one that's sale related, continues to be fairly hard, right? There are very few platforms that can even deliver on those kind of, numbers, or even predict that kind of ROAS. Three large ones being Amazon, Facebook, and Google, right? As someone who's obviously taking a creative first approach and then building the science along with it, what's the process that you've seen work for brands up until now? And again, if you could give examples of maybe a campaign or two that you've done where you found a way to marry the creativity, but also balanced it with a definition of ROI.
So the right way to look at it, that's how we've always done it. I'll pick a couple of brands and speak about how we work with them. Let me pick someone like a Unilever on one end and someone like a Netflix on the other, and two very distinctly different kinds of brands if you look at it. With the Unilever, the focus over time has shifted from just doing a lot of stuff around the products they had to being very specific about commerce, about product. So what we're really building with them is, you can think of it like a production factory that has creatives spread out across them, because you have so many different kinds of consumers. You would deal with 3 to 4 categories, or what we call cohorts of or tribes of consumers. We're doing about 16 to 20 categories and cohorts of them. So when you're breaking them down that way, what you're doing is, okay, how do I come up with enough creatives and enough variations to be able to reach them? So that's what we've actually been able to do with them, is that we've worked with Unilever over the years to kind of build that in to say, okay, there is a larger strategy when we look at it long term. But in the short term, we're creating so many creative assets on a day-to-day basis that each of them has a specific reason for being there. Each of them has multiple variations. So it's a very product first, push to sale first approach, especially on digital. And that's becoming more and more of what brands like this who are in the CPG or FMCG category kind of operate. So it's a great case for us, right? On the other side, there's Netflix. We've had an interesting journey with them where we were actually their first agency when they started off in India. Obviously they work with multiple partners and we've done a bunch of stuff with them over the years. But what I feel is interesting with them is we went in from a very editorial first approach, right? How do we make them understand the consumer of today in India, not come in as an international brand talking to Indian consumers, but saying, okay, fine, sorry, we're late. But almost innately become India 2.0, as we like to call it, and really go and start talking to them in the language in which they're speaking online. So if you see anything which Netflix puts out online, it has a distinct voice to it. It's very innately Netflix. You'll sometimes create content which is a series by itself, which is residing on social media, not necessarily something that is promoting something that's on the Netflix app. So There is really about building an entire editorial hub around a brand and really taking an editorial first approach. Is done really well for them because you kind of build a brand loyalty, but you also build a certain ecosystem of people who look at Netflix a certain way because of what we say online. So two very different ways of looking at it, but I would say two distinct ways in which modern advertising is going, which is a product first, really focused on setting it out there in that consumer journey of buying it. But the other side is strong editorial and publisher focus as a brand, which for me are the two strong things for the future for advertising.
So if we had to double tap on being a publisher first brand, right? What does that mean to people listening in?
So I relate it to how television channels traditionally worked, right? You would not look at every piece in its individual self. You would have a yearly programming calendar. You would have a few tentpole shows, the bigger ones. So if I take a Colors, for instance, a Big Boss is a tentpole show. You'd have a Khatronga Khiladi. But you'd also have the smaller ones. That's stuff that people would snack in and snack out on a day-to-day basis. You'd have once mid-level one every quarter. If a brand looks at their content calendar that way and says, okay, in a year, I'm going to do all these things. Some will work, some will not work, but let's not look at them as individual pieces, but let's see how they feed together as a whole and how they kind of, so are people coming to me to consume content first and brand second, is really the editorial approach. And if you do it that way, what it also does is it changes the way you think about things. You think about it saying, I was recently on in a discussion where I think Prajakta Kohli said this, and I really like what she said, that she and Bionic had this discussion, and what he said was that you can take the brand out of branded content and it still is as engaging. That's good content. And I think if brands look at it from that lens, and many brands are now, you're creating a lot of content in the year. Your brand seamlessly, its values and what it's going to push out is a part of it. But you're not looking at them in individual side. Oh, has my one film got X number of views? But how much traction and engagement are you building across a year because of the mix you kind of put together? So that's really for me the editorial first approach. Someone like a Dunzo for me is a great example, right? That film they just put out, the animated one, which I think came out yesterday, day before, is beautiful, and they do it in house, which for me is even more interesting because it's almost an editorial animation hub sitting inside a brand and doing it, not necessarily an agency. So yeah, so I can see a lot of those popping out now.
And if you had to, say, for instance, talk about or even give advice to brands on how do you create these publisher mindset teams within your organization, right? Because at some level, they have to be slightly removed from your sales funnel, right? They have to they have to sit outside of, what's my churn and what's my top line, bottom line, commission, etc., etc. How, in your opinion, do you think organizations can create these teams in-house? And do it in a way which is also scalable. Do it in a way where you don't have to add 3, 4, 5, 6 more people for every new unit that you're creating or every new channel that you're launching.
So the way brands can kind of build an editorial first approach is honestly two sides, right? You need to very clearly know what are the quantifiable points for it. Because if you're going and saying, okay, this platform should get me X number of views in the year or push as much for sale, that again at some point comes towards product and sale and everything else. But if you're turning around and saying, I want to build a platform which is almost media that I own. I'm creating my own media. I'm creating a space where consumers kind of come in to actually get value. So putting those metrics in place, and it varies from brand to brand, but it's very important to spend time on those metrics. It's very important to spend time on making sure it's not too detached from your brand as well. Sometimes you might create something which might not make sense for the brand, and that's happened as well in the past. So first build that framework out, and that framework is prime. But also to figure out the mix of the team, it's interesting to look at the kinds of content you're putting out. If I talk about the team which works on stuff like this in our agency, a lot of them don't come from agency backgrounds. They come in from a BuzzFeed, they come in from a TVF, someone's worked at OML. We pull in people from places which have had content first, editorial first approaches, and say, okay, guys, if you had to look at this brand, how would you look at it? And automatically, if you get the right mix of people together, they come back with what kind of content you can do, which is why I say the framework's important, because you're giving them the boundaries to play under, within rather. And within that, they play around with it and they keep trying stuff out. Some things really work, and you won't even think about why something would work so well. And then you kind of turn back and say, okay, something about this worked, right? Let's look at the data. The data is crucial here because trying to understand why certain kinds of consumers, react well to a brand. I'm thinking of an example where someone actually got it right and then it slid down. For me, what MTV used to do online is an interesting example. MTV at a certain point of time had a phenomenal online community, right? If you look at a community for roadies, a community for Splitsvilla, um, I remember we had done a series called Nano Drive with MTV for them years back, where we sent nanos across the country on a travel show for 3 seasons. And what really helped us amplify what we were doing on any show we did with them is they would put it out across those communities and people would react and it would push any other piece of content out there. Right? So because they own those. Eventually fizzled out because I feel the algorithms also changed on one end, and I guess the focus of MTV itself also changed. But that's a great example of how they did it. They build those communities and you then leverage them right.
So just a related question over there, right? Because I see a lot of brands that even we work with struggle with this, which is who do you build for? Do you build for the algorithm, right? Or do you build for your brand, right? So how do you address a question like that? Like because again, YouTube things that worked 5 years ago are like deadbeat now.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit of both, to be honest. You're kind of building out, at the end of the day, good content is good content. What we have to kind of work around is tweaks of how the formats kind of change. So suddenly have a Reels pop up on Instagram and you're trying to figure out how to adapt what I do for Reels. But at the end of the day, it's still good content. It's just the way you make it that changes. So a while back, I think one of the Pocket Aces creators had told me this, which I found very interesting. He said, when I make a video for TikTok, which I will relate to everything which Reels and Thriller and everybody else's content is like. He said, I start with the ending. I know what the ending needs to be. I don't start from the beginning of the story. I know that's the punch I need to hit. So, and I work backwards. Whereas everywhere else when I create content, I work from your traditional storytelling, like start, middle, and end. Here, the end is where we start in coming up with the idea, right? So sometimes your process kind of changes. I guess that all comes back to data. It's data for me is the strongest tool a creative director can have or a creative can have today. It also teaches you things in weird ways in terms of insights. From a podcast example, I learned this a while back, right? If I spoke about a topic for more than 7 to 8 minutes with a guest, my engagement went down. So now subliminally, or I don't know if that was the right word. Subliminally is the right word, fair enough. I kind of look at the clock. It's okay, 5 minutes is done. I need to start moving to another topic. I'll come back to this in 5 minutes. So it automatically becomes your process. So if you learn it, if you look at it from that perspective, which is what all creators do, which is why it's important to keep engaging with creators because they look at data in the best possible way. They don't have those filters that marketers and advertisers have, because at some point, brand planning and strategy have always had very strong, robust systems built over years, if not decades. And suddenly everything got kind of pushed aside because of the way online platforms work. So you got to still retain some of that, but also learn from these guys. And that's really the new form. And so that's the only way brands can do it. You need to keep trying stuff, keep testing stuff out. You might get some things wrong and it's fine. It's the good part about the internet is you can always make something else tomorrow. So you got to be smart about how much you spend, but also make sure you create a lot.
Yeah, the internet forgets. But actually, a point that you brought up over there, right, which is just this whole ecosystem of creators and creator communities that have sprouted up like never before, right? And it's actually kind of interesting how this concept of a rising tide lifts all boats, right? You had your creators with YouTube, but I think TikTok really kind of hit the nail in, right, where everyone just started taking cognizance of creators and adapting their brand and their content to creator communities. In all of your interaction with creators, what have you learned, right? What have you learned from the process? Yeah, so let's jump into that. And just a follow on and a related question, to that is when you look at the creator community, and if you had to, sort of like prophesize where you see it going 3, 4, 5 years later, how do you address those two questions?
So I hate the term influencer. So I'm glad we're speaking creator because I feel that you're doing a creator disservice by calling them an influencer. But again, that's a whole deep, that's a deep rabbit hole I can go into if I start talking about it. But there are a few things which are interesting that we at some point the business started working in almost like, we're building a committee for everything. Everything requires a group brainstorm. Everything required, groups of people to come together to agree on things. Creators can do a lot of things by themselves. So it's taught me that there is a bunch of stuff you do with other people, but there have to be things that you can do by yourself. um, and getting back to that process, especially during a time like this when we're at home, has really helped, because some things don't require everybody on a call to do it, right? You can have one person sit and work on it. So that's been one, like for me, one at the basic level, that's been one strong learning. um, the other thing is the techniques a lot of creators use, and I follow creators across, not like categories, right? So for instance, I'll turn to our guys who shoot product in the office and then send them videos of this one YouTuber who does product videos from home. All he asks for is um, for the product to be shipped to his house, and he does these phenomenal product videos, which normally you would expect it to be done with these high-end robotic cameras and everything else. He's doing it handheld half the time. He has a few lenses, but and it's phenomenal. I'll pick out the name and I'll let you know. But it just teaches you so much in terms of technique. So you can learn so much, because I think feel creators share their process a lot more. They all talk about what happens behind the scenes, how they make stuff. It's a lot more open in that sense, right? We're not working in, oh, if I let my secrets out, somebody else will steal it from me. Here's like, take what I'm doing and learn from it, and let's roll with that.
So I think a lot of what the creator community has done is it's almost created another channel for digital, right? And circling back to my previous question, which was for a marketer for the longest time, digital was equal to Facebook, Google for the largest part, right? And unfortunately, even to date, of 95% of the pie ends up going on platforms and channels like those. What do you think is a universe of digital, keeping creators aside? What else is there in this universe that, is actually worth exploring, that you may have seen a brand or two explore, that you feel will really pick up going forward? So what are those early trends within digital as a larger universe that you think brands can pick up on?
So there are a few one which is for me a great angle for a brand to take right now is kind of almost build your brand into an influencer itself. I spoke about Dunzo earlier. For me, Dunzo is interesting because I feel Dunzo focuses a lot on the animation focus that they have, and over time you're kind of looking forward to those stories that they create and put out there. And the fact that they build that is, in a way, they're an influencer or a creator network in that sense, when I'm waiting to see what they create next. But we often also don't look at enough avenues. Everything doesn't have to be video. Everything doesn't have to be that kind of a thing. A great example is something Wendy's did in the States, which I love as an example, is that on Fortnite they made a character almost look like the Wendy's. Forget the name of the person, but if you see the Wendy's logo, there's this girl with the red hair,
Yeah.
right? So made a character like that. She and Wendy's doesn't freeze their beef, and so she went around and started breaking all the freezers in Fortnite. That is literally it. And it became a thing. It became a thing where people would go on to Fortnite and start breaking freezers as a random thing they would do. It blew up because we forget how large gaming is, esports and gaming. Huge community in India, but we still don't know how to leverage it. I know for a fact many of people are now doing, like, let's say, you have your live stream videos, all that stuff happening. If you see the kind of the numbers of people who are doing that, but brands still don't understand how to leverage it, right? It doesn't just become, okay, let's plug a brand into a live stream. But this for me was innovative because it became mainstream news, and it just kind of blew up because it had a very strong cultural connect, right? You knew that was the Wendy's girl. You also knew that this was Fortnite, and you suddenly have people participating and posting about it and getting out there and saying stuff like that. So that's one more way, right? There are a lot more platforms and a lot more ways to kind of build content to kind of spread your stuff out there, which is still, I mean, for me, this is as much an influencer campaign or a creator campaign, because I'm sure at some point, and I don't know this for a fact, that they would have reached out to a few gamers and say, we're doing this. Do you guys just want to do that as well? Like, that's an interesting way to leverage this, which I haven't seen enough of. And I'm but I'm seeing a lot more interest here. Um, I also feel we can do a lot more with experiences. Um, when we say let's create a brand experience, we generally look at it as one singular thing. Okay, if it's an experience for, let's say, a movie, it's like let's create one space people can come in and experience it. So it's one thing, it's done, a checklist is done, you move on. But can we create like longer, broader experiences? Although now it's a tricky time to talk about that, but just because of the fact that we can't all be together. So the campaign that Drogafy did for Game of Thrones and the blood drive, the Red Cross blood drive, which is called Bleed for the Throne, that was interesting because they said you choose which house you were for, and you kind of go and give blood. And this happened at South by Southwest, happened in a bunch of other places. But what was interesting about that experience, and I know because Roshan was there at South by Southwest that year, and he told me how it was because he stood in that line. You're waiting in the queue to go give blood, right? The space you're giving blood is almost like it's like you have the Iron Throne behind you. You have that whole setup there. You're lying down over there and giving blood. But when you're in the queue, you have a couple of Dothraki who come up next to you and start like talking to you in Dothraki. You have it's sudden, and there's an online leg to it where you can experience that online as well. So those multi-platform, which is also innately digital for me, because now whatever happens in the physical space, we capture it, and I don't think that's going away because um, we innately. Somebody said the other day that young people today don't want real experiences because they're on their phones. And my response was they're capturing those real experiences on their phones, right? It's not like they don't want those experiences. So those multi-layered experiences is something which I feel we can do so much more with. So I mean, I picked two of recent times which I really love, but digital is everything now, and the way we use it can be uniquely different for our brands, as long as we have a deeper thought process on where all to layer it together and kind of build that entire experience rather than making them one-off ideas. So that for me is the tricky one. The tendency to use it as one-offs when it's a really interesting idea, but can you make it deeper and broader is for me where we really can leverage it a lot more.
Speaking of experiences, I don't know if you saw Museum of Ice Cream and what they were able, I mean,
oh my God,
insane, and what they've been able to do.
I remember that's a great experience, right? Because everybody loves ice cream, but still it's there was this other one. Was this also the one? I don't know if I'm forgetting, where you could everything was Instagrammable in the way it was set up.
Yeah,
this is the one, right?
Yeah.
Even those, for me, like many times when we create live spaces or live events, we're not creating them to be
photographed.
Instagrammable.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you make a booth. It means can the whole space become that? There was an example I was just trying to pick, which I remember very clearly, which was damn it, I lost it in my but how you can actually make this, it'll come back to me in a second.
I can fill in the space of there. No, but I don't know if you saw what H&M did for their Giambattista Wali launch in Delhi.
No, I haven't actually.
But they did a phenomenal job where it's literally what you said, right? It's about thinking of how that offline asset can be created into digital content versus creating that offline asset only for the sake of creating an offline asset. So they did a phenomenal job. That party, it was basically a party, was all over the internet. Because you know what I mean? Like they had those very like Pinteresty flowers up on a wall type thing. And actually fashion designers have been, at the forefront of like just making content as, likable and commentable as is possible.
Correct. I remember what I was talking about. If you've seen the brand Glossier.
Yeah.
Glossier, the products comes with packaging that become Instagram backdrops for you to take a photo of the product, which for me is a phenomenal product innovation, because you know that if somebody is buying a product, they might want to take a photograph of it when they unbox it, unpack it. But what you packed it in can actually become a backdrop for it. It's a tiny idea, but it's also a massive idea. Yeah. So you're bringing the experience to them as soon as they unbox it. Like the number of ASMR videos, this is something it'll make me sound extremely geeky. There are videos of just people taking the plastic off of a new iPhone. just that sound of that plastic coming off by itself is something which a lot of people obsess over. So you can actually find those. You go to YouTube and you look for ASMR videos of unboxing. You will hear the sounds of unboxing a product as a thing. I don't think that was the plan, but if it was, that's genius. So I put it.
I want to see your Chrome history after this conversation. It
I
sounds
have bizarre
fascinating.
Chrome history. Bizarre Chrome history.
So, obviously you work with all these gigantic brands, right? You mentioned Netflix, Unilever, etc., that have like millions and millions of dollars to spend on campaigns. If I was starting a brand today, and work with the assumption that this is one of those like cool direct to consumer, started my Shopify website kind of brand, what is the media mix, so to speak, that you would tell them to double tap on to build their brand, especially when everything from the bandwidth that you have to the money that you have is highly constrained?
Um, I would say initially focus a lot more on performance if you want to really get your sales out. I feel for most new brands today, well, it's important to build a visual identity by using, and I'm going digital first on this one, right? It's a, great cost barrier to kind of break through immediately rather than try to go traditional and go outdoors, etc. Um, Focus on commerce and build performance around it. So you can control your own media spends. That's something we can easily learn. All platforms let you learn that fast enough. Look at the creatives you're putting out to people, bring people in there, and then slowly the creatives you're making, you don't have to make too many of them, but build a certain style, build a certain aesthetic that kind of flows through over time, that makes people look at something and say, oh, one second, this looks like that brand, right? Bring that recall value in. So don't discount what good design can do for brand recall, and focus a lot on bringing people to sale. So have your own e-com destination, for instance, but also have strategies, for instance, in case you want to put it up on Amazon, etc. Right? So start off with that. Build content that will push for sale. It will give you that initial push up, because you can focus on brand building at a later point of time. If you ask me, the first stop is kind of get your brand to a point where you have enough money flowing, enough sales flowing for you to be able to be a sustainable business. And then once you hit that one level, you can really focus on brand building. And that's generally what I've always told startups to focus on that. Build. Look at a few platforms. Don't have to do everything everywhere. You don't most probably don't need a YouTube channel. You don't have to be on Twitter. You might just require you put some stuff up on Facebook. Focus on Instagram, and that's enough for you to be able to push stuff out there. Instagram, actually, if you're a lot more visual as a brand. If you're not visual as a brand, then it's a lot more Google search, very targeted in that sense towards. So yeah, you can actually just keep it simple. You just start off with a certain set of platforms and see how it's going, and then slowly build others in. And initially in-house as much as you can. Work with an agency or someone to consult with you to kind of build out what your framework needs to be in the initial days. And we've actually done that with some startups, right? We've turned to them and said, let's do this. We'll set your style. We'll set almost a content template for you, and we'll build all of that for you, and we'll hand it to the people you in-house, because we know this is not a sustainable thing for you to do, and we definitely, while we'll bring down certain cost metrics because we're working this model, what we want to do is we're going to set you up with almost like a starter pack kit that you can take on for the year, right? And you can kind of come back, and I feel that startups appreciate that. They appreciate that you're thinking in terms of what is good for them, and not just saying, okay, I only charge this much money, so I can't work with you if you don't pay that much money. It's not like we haven't said that in the past, and we've regretted it later, which is why we evolved into this kind of a model by looking at what do they really need, and let's give them that. And sometimes even larger brands come to us for those things. We work with Nike on their e-com in India. That's the only thing we do with them. And it's a very razor focused approach, but it works well for us. It works well for them because they know we're really focusing on building that out for them. It's an interesting mandate. We enjoy doing it because Nike on commerce is very interesting for us to also kind of learn from how they're doing globally and for what we can add in here. And we take some of those learnings and kind of build that out across other brands as well.
Speaking of building brands, you have like crushed it with building your own personal brand, right? Specifically with Advertising is Dead.
Unintentionally.
I mean, irrespective of what the original intent was, you've absolutely killed it, right? You just hit 100 episodes of Advertising is Dead. You've also, found a way to, and just with Advertising is Dead, you picked up something that no one was thinking about, right? All your guests are like Indian creators, Indian marketing heads, Indian CEOs, founders. And I think through what you've done, it's so special because you've created a voice for a community that otherwise hasn't adopted digital as quickly as you thought they would. So maybe if we could start with what got you to launch Advertising is Dead, and why did you continue, for 2 years? And I'm sure you bring it back once you're back from your little sabbatical.
So it happened. It totally happened by chance. I wasn't a podcast listener. I used to be a huge, still am to a large extent, video consumer in that sense of the word. And but what happened was, a friend of mine who runs a podcast called the Filter Coffee Podcast, Karthik Nagarajan hosts it with IVM. He was doing his pilot. He needed someone to be his bakra for the pilot because pilots don't necessarily air. So he said, "Come, will you just like it might not air, but will you just come?" I said, "Okay, fine." So I did that. Enjoyed it because it suddenly it a podcast feels very liberating for especially for someone who's worked with video their entire career, because you don't have many of the constraints or the logistics that video involves. That your camera, light, setup, none of those things are there. You're just sitting in front of a mic and you're done. Um, and then I went, and the IBM guys who he was doing he still does the show with them. They were doing another show called Simplified, where they were doing a live recording in a brewery, and I was a guest on that as well. And we just got talking after that, and we realized there was no podcast around this space. And they asked me if I'd be open to thinking about hosting one. And I've always thought I have a weird voice. I've always been told that my innate South Indianness comes out once in a while. I mumble. I've traditionally mumbled a lot. I speed through things very quickly when I speak. So phenomenal number of jokes from college times, school times to now about how Varun mumbles and just speaks, says the words which are supposed to be highlighted a little more clearly. So I never really a thought in my head, but I tried it out and it was fun because um, for me, I think it was my pilot that really taught me so much. I did a pilot which was horrendous because I only asked questions and I didn't contribute. And I listened to it and I was cringing throughout, and I like, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, right? And I give Amit and Kavita this from IBM that they told me that what you are doing wrong here is you're just asking us questions. You're not contributing. And because I don't come from advertising, for me it was an interesting thing to do because I feel like I've learned more about this space in the last 2 years than in the last 10 years of running Glitch. Primarily because I speak to people from across spaces. I'm learning every week. So I look at it as I'm not a person who's I'm not coming in saying, oh, I know something about this as well. As much as I'm coming in saying, I want to learn more about this. I want to learn about how this person's done this or how they think, so I can take some learnings away. And for me, it's like going back to school. Um, I learn every week. I also call it my weekly therapy session because I feel like conversations about things really help me. And so I look forward to, which is why I did 100 weeks in a trot, because I hadn't taken a break. I finally decided to take one now just because I thought it's time to stop and think about a few things about the show a little bit. But what I've also enjoyed is that I'm a lot more bullish about the industry than I was 2 years ago. 2 years ago, it was a thing we were doing. I mean, obviously, when an entrepreneur, you end up dealing with a lot of things, and sometimes you don't necessarily focus on the pure work of it, the pure craft. But I feel I respect the craft a lot more. I also respect the legacy of it a lot. You would look at traditional ways of working in advertising and say, we don't care about that. We're new age now, and you would have some of those sadly juvenile points of view when you start off. I come to respect some parts of that a lot more now, and I just try to put that out there. And my idea has always been that if I had known some of these things when I was in school or in college, maybe I would have made a few different choices, which I don't necessarily feel like I would have anyway, because I've done random choices in life. But I feel like giving back. I love talking to students and kind of giving them something more than what they get. And that in some way has made me popular. But that is literally my thing. What do you need? How can I help you? In many cases, I'll just hear you out. And that's been my thing.
And like you said, though your original intent wasn't necessarily to build your personal brand up, but if you look across the sort of stratosphere, every single founder, CEO, etc., is thinking about how they're presenting themselves externally, right? And and things like things that you do on social media, or podcasting, or all of these small little things add up to a larger sort of a brand message or brand picture or whatever else, right? What, in your opinion, is a use case of building a personal brand, specifically, for the kind of place that you're coming from?
I feel building a personal brand is an interesting thing to do, especially in today's world, because it gives you it gives you a way to kind of tell people what you are beyond, let's say, your CV or what's in the press, right? That's also one of the reasons I didn't want it to become a competitor to any of the publications in the space, right? Because when you're staying within that pond, you're staying within that same chamber of people who are talking to each other. But which is why for me, it's always been about, okay, if you can tell people what you are as a person, what you stand for, what you consume, what you talk about, it in some way also spreads out what they can kind of get from everything connected to you. So it kind of it feeds back into your professional life, and vice versa, right? So I feel my learnings of being a podcaster, but plus also the fact that there is a certain level of people know that I do this now, and so I get asked questions from that lens. I've had enough clients call me in from a creator perspective in a meeting than someone who's with their agency. So I find it really funny when my team says they don't want to come in as part of us. They want you to kind of come in to almost give a creative perspective, which I feel is great, because they look at you differently, they listen to your points of view differently, and in that way, what you largely want to achieve as a company, you can actually get done. But also as an individual, I feel it's satisfying, right? I mean, at some point, you feel that you can put something out there and people kind of do resonate with it, so makes you learn from it. I went down that rabbit hole of trying to say, okay, now I have to look at my content on social clearly, try to make a content calendar for myself, started putting up posts. I worked with this one boy out of Hyderabad who did some design work on my content, and I suddenly one day got up and said, I don't want to go that route. Like, I didn't want to suddenly be manufacturing what I was putting out there. So I went back to being a lot more organic, a little more sporadic in that sense of the word. And that's where my whole thing about experimentation and trying stuff out and testing kind of comes in, because that's what I've learned. I've tried many things even on the podcast, which I only maybe tried once or twice. People might not have noticed it, but I've literally done 4 different formats of AMA episodes, of which the first 3 failed in my mind. 4th worked, but became a lot of work to do. I've tried to do one-off episodes of specific formats, which I just said, okay, this worked. Let me park that for a later time. So you keep trying stuff out, and at some point that also feeds back, because you're getting people in to speak about these things.
And related to that, right, what are the 3 things that you thought were like the absolute truth, but then your guests, or like the whole experience of creating this podcast, made you realize that you were actually highly mistaken? So what are the 3 prior truths that you had to unlearn through this process?
I honestly thought creators were a lot more technical. I thought the creators looked at it from a much more like technical sense. Okay, these guys are really like, this so young, but yet honed their craft and they've done. But they're like, just having fun doing it. I don't know this. I just worked with someone. This is how I did it, and it was so. For me, it was liberating to hear that. I think that's one big thing that went away. I also realized that I've seen generations of marketers now across the show. What I enjoy about it is that I'm yet to meet, apart from maybe a few who I will not talk about, who are from the space, not necessarily just marketers, who are looking at the future in a mildly pessimistic tone. Everyone's extremely optimistic about it. I expected a lot more pessimism, but I've gotten, I would say, 98% optimism about the future from everybody, which is great to hear. I will not talk about the 2% where it has been there. I also, one thing which I'm actually happy about, and I don't know if this is exactly a response to what your question was, is that you don't only have to get people who are famous or people who are known. And you can learn so much from people basis what their experiences in life are and what they do. Because you can get 2 marketing heads from the same space into a show. Both can have very different areas of focus and very different areas of just like the way they think. which can help someone. So I also got stuck in that rut in between where I was, okay, maybe I need to get enough people who are popular, right? Will get me more listens, etc. But I realized that it doesn't need to be that all the time. You have to get some people who are popular from time to time. It just helps the numbers, also helps the conversation. But getting enough value out of each individual is the most interesting thing you can get. And what I found interesting is that I've also found introverts in marketing. I have found people who have unique um, hobbies. I remember Nishad, one of these marketers I spoke to. He's a award-winning gardener.
What?
And I was like, I didn't even know that was a thing, right? So is why I try to get that aspect about people as well, right? If you normalize the fact that this is not like, and all of them have said when they start their careers, they didn't know they would end up doing what they're doing. Almost all of them were very clear that they've just made choices and ended up here, that they don't know everything about everything. So it's more relatable for students because the largest amount of my audience is young people, right? Studying or just starting their career. So for them to hear that just makes it a lot nice. So that normalizing of things, I was hoping to normalize. Thankfully, what I hoped happened. My worry was I would suddenly get this serious chat, and I've had chats with some guests where sometimes you feel like you're going to fall asleep. I've had those.
Same.
And you need to figure out ways to make it more engaging, but those are also few and far between. And sometimes, but if you prod that guest and ask them a personal question or ask them about something which they enjoy doing beyond work, you suddenly see that boredom kind of become a lot more fun. In most cases, in some cases they might just be boring, but I've thankfully not had too much of that.
Look at you, Mr. Duggirala, taking your own advice seriously and having a publisher mindset. That's fantastic. Okay, last couple of questions for you. This is going to be the world's lamest rapid fire, except I will send you a hamper from Shop on LBB.
I do the world's worst rapid fire, which is not rapid. So at least
I'm actually the world's worst. This is not a competition. I don't know why I'm making it one, but I'm the worst rapid fire responder because my answers are always so long. But okay, a book, podcast, author, or content creator who anyone building a brand must follow.
Scott Galloway.
You really like that guy?
Scott Galloway is my gold standard. My gold standard of someone. Why I like Scott Galloway is I've been following him from before he became the popular person that he is, right? I looked at it from the lens of someone who was an NYU professor, but also created a company around data for specific categories of brands. Started making YouTube videos around it, but just brought his personality to it. But over time, realized that personality is what was bringing people to him. So sold that company, now running a learning startup, 2 podcasts. Just generally, like just the way he's taking business knowledge and strategy and stuff like that, but making it truly engaging. I did his course. He does a 3 courses: strategy. There's a strategy course, there's a brand strategy course, and a product strategy course. I did the broader strategy one, and it was such a different learning experience. In 2 weeks, I learned a lot. There was a project, there was all that stuff, but just look at how he puts stuff out. And he's not everywhere. He doesn't have an Instagram account. He just tweets. So great example to look at about how to kind of build stuff around it. He had a show on Vice recently. He had his own, which is also interesting. That's one good example. The other example for me would be, I mentioned Matt Diavella a while back. I think Matt Diavella is an interesting example because again, he's tried a bunch of stuff, right? Cinematographer, then started a podcast and a YouTube channel. Did a lot of minimalism and self-help videos. Still does a bunch of those, but over time has evolved his content to just be a lot more than just self-help. It's a lot more self-improvement. Learning course. I'm sure he'll write a book. So it's looking at how these guys branch out and do different things. For me, is where I find it interesting, and I'm seeing more Indians creators as well doing that, but I think we're still early in that cycle of things. But yeah, so these are 2 names that come to mind.
Second question, who's the one person you'd want on Advertising is Dead who's not Scott Galloway? Because I saw your tweet about that.
So I have a few names. Few people I always want to speak to, primarily because I just thought it would be interesting to have chats with. from the pure play advertising side, for me, it's always been to kind of pick David Droga's brain, because I feel that the way Drogafy looked at advertising when they launched to even now, obviously now a lot of people do it, was so unique in its thought process that you weren't creating a campaign that would just come on advertising or marketing publication. You're creating a campaign that was coming on mainstream television. You'd be on a CNN, you'd be on, you'd be on mainstream news because what you created was so intriguing and so newsworthy and so great for the brand. So David Droga would be one from the advertising space. I don't know if I would. People keep telling me that I'm sure you'd love to have Gary Vee on the show, but I don't know if I would love to have Gary Vee on the show. I would enjoy it, but he would not be on my list. Because I kind of feel like I know that Gary will say. If you watch every one of his videos, you know what he's going to say. So, not him. I actually want to redo an episode I've done. That would be on my list. I want to redo my chat with Ronnie Screwvala because I feel that it was too early in my podcast journey, and I feel I was extremely nervous. And I asked him the usual suspect questions. And over time, I've learned that if you actually get people in who are used to doing interviews and you tell them, I'm not going to ask about the usual stuff, but this stuff, which I feel you might find interesting, push them to answer that. That might actually be interesting. So I'd actually want to do round two with Ronnie if that was a possibility. So yeah, those would come. And yeah, you said Scott Galloway anyway, so I'm not getting into that one. That's a long one.
And last question for you, which is what is one or as many as you'd like emerging Indian brands that should be in everyone's little black book?
Arata is a new one which I've grown to love just primarily because how good the Arata, right?
Yeah. And you can shop them on LBB, guys. My plug.
Yeah, phenomenal. I bought one. I know that Pooja bought one product and I ended up buying all. Because just generally, I've had like terrible hair issues my entire life, and finally I found a shampoo that works for it, which is I didn't care if it was vegan, but I just think it's good for me. There are a few others, right? I look at a bunch of brands like I love what Daily Objects does. I think they've tried to make it interesting in terms of just like again take product problem. I just like a geek out on that part of it. I'm just trying to think of another one which I use a lot of.
You said
I
March
sampled
tea
too many.
The last time.
Oh yes, correct. March tea, I bought everything they've ever made. March tea is phenomenal. Just especially during lockdown for me, it's been my go-to t-shirt. Not the one I'm wearing right now, but in general, it's been my go-to t-shirt to wear. I also end up going and shopping at. Let me think of a slightly different example than what I've said so far. Bombay Shaving Company. For a person with a beard to use Bombay Shaving Company as my products as much as I do, because they have by far for any person with beards the best beard cream you can get. I have tried every other brand, including mainstream as well as this one. Yeah, and I hear the razors are good too. So I haven't needed one in a long time. So Masilo is a brand for anybody who has just had a baby. Because you can do one thing which I find really cute to do is that you can actually get baby stuff, but you can actually have the baby's name on it. It's corny, but the fact that Leia still wears those night suits say Leia on the thing, and they're really like fun and cute and stuff like that. So yes, Masilo was another one.
I actually haven't heard of that. So I am definitely going to add that to my little black book. Thank you so much, Varun. This was fantastic. And I'm so glad we switched roles this time around. No, but thanks a lot.
You gave me an avenue to blurt out a lot of things around marketing and advertising, which I haven't blurted out in a long time, or I don't think I ever have.
Yeah, no, but thank you so much for doing this. Enjoy your Sunday.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.